Hello, bonjour. As part of the CSPC 2021 interview series, we have with us Dr. Ted Hewitt, President of Social Science and Humanities Research Council, or SHIRC. Thank you for accepting our invitation and welcome to CSPC 2021, Dr. Hewitt.
Great to be here once again this year, Mehrdad.
So let me start off with this question. Now that we are transitioning to an endemic period of COVID-19, what does SHIRC see itself and where does SHIRC see itself in the recovery phase of the pandemic?
Well, I think, having observed the events of the last year and a half or so, everyone would be in agreement that the social dimensions of the pandemic, whether you're talking about its origins, the way it expanded and grew around the world, ultimately its resolution, certainly as medical dimensions to it, but the social dimensions, are really critical at all these various stages. So I think in this regard, social sciences and humanities, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council have a really critical role to play. And we've done so in a number of respects, and I'll come back to where we're going in a minute. But one of the main things was through the continued support that we provided to researchers through the pandemic, because you remember, like many of the issues that we heard about through the pandemic, the effects on marginalized communities, vaccine hesitancy, and so forth. These are things that researchers are working on constantly through support that's provided by the council. And during the pandemic, quite often researchers shifted to consider those particular issues within the context of the pandemic. So I think that was an absolutely critical move on our part to ensure that funding remained in place. Secondly, specific or special programming that we developed, sometimes in concert with the other agencies. I mentioned vaccine hesitancy. We had a call with NSERC and CIHR. We also participated in a number of CIHR special calls on the pandemic. We had some of our own, also looking specifically at the social impacts of COVID. And don't forget the New Frontiers in Research Fund, which SHIRC administers on behalf of the other councils, in the work that it had done to maintain programming, but also in the special call that was recently announced that focuses on how research projects have modified themselves or accommodated to the pandemic in terms of new methodological or theoretical approaches. So that's going to have a great bearing on how research gets done in future. And then, of course, the emergency funding that SHIRC managed on behalf of the government, $450 million, another $249 million as well with the other councils, which was absolutely critical to keeping the machine going. And we're all aware of that. In terms of the future, obviously, this is something we've all been thinking about, given the kind of work that we do, the focus on the social dimensions. And that includes not just effects on marginalized groups, but the economy, international relations, how we move forward in terms of dealing with the next pandemic. We're working on that through research we fund, and also through an important project that we worked on with CIHR on the UN research roadmap for COVID-19 recovery, which was approved and implemented last year in order to help research funding agencies around the world really figure out and think about what kind of research needs to be done to affect the recovery as we move forward with the pandemic. And that's a major effort that's continuing. We will, at CRCC, for example, through the New Frontiers and Research Fund, also be announcing a new fund that will support those UN research recovery roadmap initiative as well. So there are a number of things going on over the next few months to support the recovery as well.
Fascinating to hear those, and I will come back to some of those items that you mentioned. I'd like to ask a question in French. En août, Innovation, Sciences et Développement Économique Canada a lancé une nouvelle initiative visant à investir dans la recherche médicale et la biofabrication au Canada, dans l'espoir de mieux placer le Canada pour anticiper et répondre aux futures pandémiques et aux risques liés à la santé. Quel est le rôle du CRSH dans le cadre de cette grande initiative et quel impact cette annonce a-t-elle eu sur les priorités de votre organisme?
Okay, très bien question, Mehrdad. En se fondant sur les solides antécédents du surrasage en matière d'administration des programmes interorganismes, le gouvernement lui a confié l'administration du nouveau fonds interorganisme de recherche biomédicale qui constitue un élément clé de la nouvelle stratégie en matière de biofabrication et de sciences de la vie du Canada. Je dirais aussi que la sélection du CRSH en tant qu'agence d'administration du programme indique clairement que le gouvernement a reconnu le rôle des sciences humaines dans ce domaine. L'innovation, l'industrie, la production, marketing, propriété intellectuelle sont tous les éléments nécessaires pour assurer le succès de cette initiative sont liés aux sciences humaines, en fin de compte, avec la santé, avec la science, avec tout ça. En termes de programme, les fonds serviront à investir 250 millions de dollars sur 4 ans pour améliorer l'excellence fondamentale du Canada en matière de biofabrication, de même qu'ils sont état de préparation aux pandémies en appuyant la recherche et le développement et le talent en recherche, lesquels stimulent la capacité de biofabrication. Le secrétariat des programmes interorganismes à l'intention des établissements sera responsable d'offrir ce fonds au nombre des 3 organismes fédéraux de financement de la recherche, les IRSI, Conseil de recherche en sciences naturelles et en génie, le CRSNG et le CRSH. Il travaillera en étroite collaboration avec la Fondation canadienne pour l'innovation. Les subventions seront attribuées à la suite d'un processus concurrentiel qui tiendra compte des mérites scientifiques, des propositions et des critères stratégiques. Évidemment, de plus amples détails concernant les fonds et son lancement officiel sont à venir.
Merci. Speaking of bolstering Canada's position as a global leader in the health sciences during the onset of the pandemic, the Chief Science Advisor called for a greater collaboration and open access among researchers to quickly respond to the challenges of the pandemic. What work is SHRC doing to meet this call and to foster open science in Canada generally?
It's a great topic, and one that concerns us all. And one I would say that has collided, perhaps unnecessarily or perhaps necessarily, with the whole issue of research security and how intellectual property and how the products of research, may need to be protected, in a world where competition is very fierce for scientific advance and scientific ideas for application across countries. But open science per se is a value that SHRC supports, very, very seriously, has for many years. A couple of programs I'll mention which demonstrate this, both of which we've undertaken with the other granting councils. One is the Tri-Agency Research Data Management Policy, which was launched in March of this year and is being phased in incrementally. So this is a policy that's intended to promote sound research data management practices and sound data stewardship practices to ensure that research results are as open as possible, safeguarded as necessary, as we all know, and at base to establish a sound basis for fair principles and international best practice for improving the findability, accessibility, interoperability, and the reuse of digital assets. So it's very, very important. We're at the initial stages of that, but we are starting to move forward. We also have our open access policy, which has been in place for a number of years now, which states that grant recipients are required to ensure that any peer-reviewed journal publications arising from agency-supported research must be freely accessible within 12 months. And I think just to conclude, I'll reiterate the importance in this context of ensuring security with respect to research and research data, given some of the recent research security risks that we've all been discussing within Canada and internationally. So those two things need to be dealt with in the same conversation, and certainly are in my understanding, through the CSA's initiative for Open Science for Canada, which of course SSHRC fully supports.
That's very interesting. Thank you for this comprehensive response. Another question in French. Le déploiement des vaccins à travers le monde nous a donné des raisons d'être optimistes en termes de coordination internationale en réponse à une crise. En même temps, l'hésitation à se faire vacciner est un défi permanent au Canada, comme d'ailleurs. Quel rôle la CRSH peut-il jouer sur la scène internationale en répondant à de futurs défis mondiaux?
Okay, merci pour cette question, Mehrdad. C'est exactement la question que se pose régulièrement le CRSH dans le cadre de son initiative Imaginer l'avenir du Canada. Et cette initiative encourage les chercheurs à aborder un certain nombre de défis futurs dans leur proposition de recherche. D'ailleurs, l'un des défis qui traite actuellement cette initiative porte sur le thème de la santé et de la mieux-être de l'échelle mondiale au XXIe siècle. En général, la collaboration internationale sur les enjeux mondiaux est essentielle, en fait, et les chercheurs financés par le CRSH, tout comme leurs travaux, sont souvent au cœur de ces discussions. Par exemple, baptisé Rétablissement, Renouveau et Résilience dans un monde post-pandémique, le récent appel des propositions conjointes lancées par la plateforme transatlantique et un programme dans lequel le CRSH a joué un rôle de premier plan. Plus d'une douzaine d'organismes de recherche des deux côtés de l'Atlantique y ont participé. Le CRSH aussi continuera également à offrir les fonds Nouvelles Frontières en recherche afin d'appuyer à la recherche interdisciplinaire de pointe, ce qui comprend le soutien à la collaboration internationale avec la possibilité d'une future initiative sur le changement climatique. Et je vais parler plus à ça à l'avenir dans les semaines qui viennent.
So you partly answered my last question about the role of SSHRC in global affairs. So in English, do you have any last remarks on opportunities for the humanities and social sciences to develop solutions to the world's major challenges?
This is, another really good question. And, this is another domain where SSHRC and SSHRC researchers work fundamentally, as part of their research subject. So, something certainly to review and pay attention to is that work continues as the social sciences and humanities are really effectively in a great position to better provide an understanding of the economic and social impacts of science and technology. And I've spoken about this, again and again and again. Science can tell us how. It doesn't tell us whether we should, and it doesn't tell us, really at the end of the day what the impacts will be or how we ensure that those impacts are minimized. So this is something that we really, really need to keep working on. At the international level, I think as well, engaging with research partners creates an avenue for dialogue. I think we all know that, and closer collaboration between Canadians and international counterparts, and we're doing more and more of that. I think an excellent example of that, as I was discussing earlier, was the UN Research Roadmap, where CIHR and Stephen Hoffman's Institute in particular pulled together literally dozens, hundreds of heads of agencies and researchers to talk about what the critical elements of a recovery should be and how agencies globally should cooperate to affect those. I think that's a great example of science diplomacy. It was announced in the UN by the Deputy Secretary General, and the work on that project continues.
Great to hear that. So my last question, as always, is regards to CSPC. You have been with CSPC for a long time, helping us, supporting us all along, and participating in various activities. I want to ask for your opinion about the value of CSPC offering to the community and its position as a convener, connector, and capacity builder in science and innovation policy landscape. How do you see this value?
You know what, we've really been pleased to be working with you and the other agencies for all these years. Clearly, the Canadian Science Policy Conference has created really what's become a necessary environment for Canada's research leaders to interact with policymakers, and it's delivered again and again and again. And I think, the success of last year's conference, even despite the context of the pandemic, I think is an important testament to that role as a meeting ground for the research community, but for the research community and government and policymakers. So thank you, Mehrdad, to you and your team for everything you do year after year after year. So we're super pleased, again, to be partnering with you. A couple of highlights, too, I just want to mention briefly. I will be participating once again with the Canada Research Coordinating Committee in a plenary session on November the 22nd, bringing together a panel of executives, my colleagues from CRCC, and to build on last year's plenary, highlighting the collective response of CRCC members to combat the pandemic, mitigate the challenges faced by the research community, build back better, all the things we've been talking about so far today. And the second piece, SSHRC's Future Challenges team with Isabelle Lacroix of the Institut Quantique at the Université de Sherbrooke will host a joint panel session regarding social impacts of emerging issues in quantum science. So that's going to be very interesting, right? Because you have now social scientists and humanists sitting down with scientists to talk about what's really going to happen with quantum in terms of its impact. What kinds of barriers, what kinds of issues will come up as quantum technologies are implemented, and how will we as a society meet those? What policies will we need to develop? What information will we need to provide? And this is happening and fairly quickly, as you may know, in particular in the world of finance and finance management. Quantum technologies are certainly moving quickly, and we need to think about that in ways maybe we didn't so much in the realm of artificial intelligence, where things kind of move forward faster than our ability really to think about what the implications of that might be. And if you own a new car and you think your car is doing more of the driving than you should be, then you know exactly what I'm talking about with respect to AI. We need to get a handle as well on quantum technologies.
That's thank you for bringing that up. And I want to ask the viewers, if you're watching this during or before the conference, this interview, please make sure you attend the sessions as mentioned by Dr. Hewitt on November 22nd, especially the social impacts of emerging quantum technologies. That would be should be a fascinating session. I'm very much looking forward to that. And with that, I want to thank you, Dr. Hewitt, for taking part in our interview series once again. And thanks for all the support that SSHRC's provided to CSPC now and in the past.
And thank you, Mehrdad, as always, for the work you do in putting together the conference, and particularly for offering us this opportunity today to provide some input into the process once again this year.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Hello.